The ghosts are moving tonight, restless, hungry. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is lucky episode 13 of season 5, and we felt the need for some classic Vincent Price in our lives. So this week we are watching The House on Haunted Hill.
So I'm going to start us out with a little bit of an overview of The House on Haunted Hill, and I'm also going to give a short plot summary, and then we can kind of get into our impressions. So The House on Haunted Hill, we're talking about the 1959 version that had Vincent Price as the star and was directed and produced by William Castle. And for long-time listeners, I'm sure you know this, but if you haven't been listening to No Fear Cast for very long, we did about 30-minute Master of Horror episode on Vincent Price for our 2018 Halloween episode. And I believe it was in our first season, one of our mini episodes for Patreons was on William Castle. And so we've talked about both the director and the actor before, but we had not done a series specifically devoted to, say, Vincent Price movies. So we figured we would start with this one, which is a favorite of all three of ours. So, with that said, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the plot for folks who may not have seen House on Haunted Hill. Though I have to say, if you have not watched House on Haunted Hill, you should stop right now and go watch it. One, we're going to spoil it, and two, you just need to watch it. There's the original black and white version and a colorized version that are available on Prime. I watched the original black and white version as I typically do, but both options are available if you want to watch it on streaming. So, as I mentioned earlier, House on Haunted Hill came out in 1959. It was directed by William Castle. It was written by Rob White. It was starring, there was kind of an ensemble cast. Vincent Price was the main star. He was playing an eccentric, wealthy man, millionaire. Carol Omark played his wife. Elisha Cook played the owner of this house that they're having this quote unquote party in. And then the guests were played by Richard Long, Julie Mitchum, Carolyn Craig, and Alan Marshall. And so what happens is Vincent Price's character, Frederick Lauren, is an eccentric millionaire who is throwing a party for his fourth wife, who I believe was named Annabelle. And he basically tells these people if they stay the whole night in this, he doesn't tell them it's haunted until they get there, but he says, if you stay the whole night in this haunted house, I will give each of you, whoever stays the whole night, $10,000. They're going to be locked in. None of them will be able to get out. Once they get there, he tells them that the house is haunted. There are, I think, 7 ghosts, 4 men, 3 women, the same numbers as the people that he's invited. And he then proceeds to give everybody a gun in order to protect themselves and says if anybody happens to die, the money then gets divided amongst the survivors. So there's like this extra bit of risk or this kind of extra disturbance that's going on. And he says it was his wife's idea to have the guns involved. So from the very beginning, we see these people, a test pilot, a young dashing test pilot, Lance Schroeder, a newspaper columnist, Ruth Bridges, with a gambling problem, the owner of the house, Watson Pritchard, who has a drinking problem, and a psychiatrist and who specializes in hysteria, apparently, because that's what he talks about most of the time in the movie. And then you have Nora, who is a young woman who works for one of Lauren's businesses and has been chosen mysteriously. She doesn't know him. None of them know him. And so you have these people who don't know each other, who have different levels of belief in the supernatural, and they're all thrown together. And it's also kind of a mystery because Frederick Lauren and his wife do not get along. She is his 4th wife, I believe 3rd or 4th wife. The other ones were pretty much murdered. They had heart attacks even though they were in their 20s. And she and Frederick don't get along very well. And so basically the movie is, we find out that they're each trying to use the party to do in the other. She wants all of his money. And so there's like a staging of her death so she can come back. And they're basically, she and the psychiatrist are trying to manipulate the young woman into killing someone, hopefully Frederick. And there's this disturbing kind of almost humor to the terrible relationship between Frederick and his wife. One of my favorite quotes in this movie is when he all of a sudden says to her, "Remember the fun we had when you poisoned me?" And then later he tells her not to think too hard about killing him because it'll give her wrinkles, which is just so disturbing and cruel, but also just like he tosses it off so lightly. Couple little bits of trivia before I jump in and pitch it to Lisa or Matt for their impressions to get us started. The house where this takes place, which every time you see the house, I'm just like, what? Because the movie poster shows a Victorian house, as you would expect, and you just kind of assume it. But no, it is the house itself is Ennis House. And it is a Mayan revival, an example of Mayan revival architecture. So it's a Frank Lloyd Wright house. And basically it has, according to the Frank Lloyd Wright website, about 27,000 of these blocks that are arranged across a concrete platform. So it was one of the first houses that was built with all concrete. And so it looks like a Mayan temple. It does not look like what I would expect as a haunted house. It's very modern. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting juxtaposition. They just did exterior shots of the house. It was studio stages for all the interiors. But some of the television shows and movies that have used the exterior and a couple of the interior of Ennis House are on the Frank Lloyd Wright website. They list The Rocketeer, Rush Hour, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Predator 2, Blade Runner. I believe parts of it were the main character's apartment. Beverly Hills Cop 2 and Mulholland Drive. And the house is now privately owned, so you can't see it, but it's being renovated. I believe it sustained some damage in an earthquake in like the 90s or the early 2000s. So the house itself kind of has some interesting background. And then the other thing I wanted to throw out there is something that we talked about in the William Castle episode, is for most of his movies, William Castle had some sort of gimmick, like some agreement you had to sign to say that you would not hold him responsible for you having a heart attack during the movie, or his Spectrovision, where you had to wear glasses if you wanted to see the ghosts and 13 Ghosts, or don't wear the glasses, you wear the other glasses if you want to see the ghosts. The gimmick in this one was what what the AV Club calls real life 3D, which he called emergo. So as the skeleton comes out of the vat of acid at the end, in theaters, a plastic skeleton would come flying from right above the screen down over the audience's head. So it reminded me of what theme parks call 4D, where you have your 3D glasses on, but then they spray water on you and make your seat move and things like that. So you had a plastic skeleton kind of in the room with you. And I know some, like in revivals of the movie in some small theaters, they still do this today. In one of the articles I was reading, somebody would say that they had to stop using the skeleton at some places because kids would try to grab it apparently, or try to like interact with it. But that was the gimmick for this. When Vincent Price's character is using his puppeteer thing to move the skeleton around, a skeleton would actually move around in the theater with you. So this has to be one of my top Vincent Price movies and William Castle movies, and I really enjoy it just as a haunted house movie. I love the use of all like the carnival haunted house gimmicks of the screaming and the moaning and the chains and even the stuff that happens to them in the house. It's so traditional in that respect. But Matt, Lisa, what are some of your impressions of this movie? Either impressions now or maybe impressions from when you watched it a while back.
Well, number one, I love this movie. This is one of my favorite Vincent Price movies. I don't know if it is my top favorite, but it's definitely up there. And I just kept thinking when you're listing off all the filming locations for the Ennis house too, that I can't remember if you said Karate Kid 3, and I feel like that deserves a shout out because the bad karate guy in that one, who I can't remember his name now, he was like a new villain that was introduced in Karate Kid 3, lived in that house. But I'm always shocked when I see this movie because I always remember that exterior when they're all driving up and they see the house, because it is this like, I don't know, it's this very formidable looking structure, it's very heavy with like stone, but then all the shots inside is obviously a different place, and it does look like a typical Gothic mansion. So that's always a little, I don't know, that's always a little distracting to me. But here are some of my thoughts about this movie, watching it for the umpteenth time. I love Vincent Price in this movie. I don't think you can get much better than like Vincent Price with a pencil thin mustache, wearing a suit for most of the movie, and just talking about wanting to kill his wife. Like, he plays the part perfectly. I want his wife to throw me a party. Because he keeps throwing out like, oh, that was my wife's, like, she wanted this or she wanted that. And it sounded so much fun. Like, his wife was just like, honey, will you throw me a haunted house party? Like, what did they call it? They called it a haunted house party, didn't they? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
so,
that's
yeah.
exactly what they called it.
Yeah, it was just like she got an idea just randomly to be like, I'm going to have a haunted house party and I'm going to invite my friends. Of course, he takes over and invites these strangers. But she says, okay, so she's going to have everybody stay overnight in a haunted house. She has everybody, it's her idea to have everybody arrive in basically like hearses, except that's not what they call them. I think they call them funeral cars in the movie. And then she has the loaded guns, which I had questions about. I mean, I know she's trying to like kill her husband or like manipulate somebody into killing her husband. But anyway, she has them very, I think, very tastefully done as party favors in tiny miniature coffins. So right away, I was just like, oh, this is wonderful. And everybody is dressed very elegantly. And I thought, this is exactly the party I want, except maybe minus the ghosts and the murderous couple. Because Vincent Price and his wife, they're both trying to openly kill each other for most of the movie. And I think for most of their marriage, probably. But anyway, that was one thing I was thinking, is I was just like, man, when we can all get together and have parties again, like, that's what I want. I want to have a haunted house party in a Frank Lloyd Wright house with Vincent Price. And I want to have everybody arrive in funeral cars. And I want to have the party favors be in little miniature coffins. So, no, I mean, I think this is this is such a fantastic story. I mean, number one, the idea of a haunted house that you can't escape. I like this, the details of the doors being locked until dawn, and they're made of steel, and even the windows have bars over them, and I think they even make a point of saying that the bars across the window are set in stone, so there's really no escaping. So right there, you've got a haunted house with no escape, which I enjoy. There's the mystery right away about why all the guests are there, because they all learn that they don't really know each other, and they don't know Vincent Price's character. They're just there for money. Everybody there fits a type, but they all need money. I love that detail. And, this movie has some decent twists too, I think, because you do see Annabelle when you think she's dead, but then you learn she's not dead. So there's just kind of that nice twist there. And then the twist at the end too, even with Nora, where she finally is manipulated into shooting Frederick. But he says he anticipated it all and loaded her gun with blanks. So he kind of comes back from the dead. So I don't know. To me, this is a tightly plotted movie, and it's still enjoyable every time I watch it. Matt, what about you?
Awful, hated it, would never watch again. No,
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
Just trash. It's just a trash movie.
No. I definitely count this up there in my favorite Vincent Price movies as well, just like both of you said. I'm going to try not to repeat too much what either of you have said, but just know that I do agree with pretty much everything. I will say this, I actually just watched it last night, and I can't remember the last time I watched it, because I had forgotten a lot of the the actual plot. I remembered some of the basics and the characters, and of course Vincent Price, but the plot was kind of murky to me until I rewatched it. So it was almost like watching it again for the first time in a lot of ways. And like both of you, I did find it interesting and in some ways kind of refreshing that the haunted house was not your classic Gothic mansion. It's very nice to have kind of a change of pace, I suppose. I think the one thought that I'm kind of going to throw out there, this was something that I just sort of, I just couldn't get around was, and it came up very early in the movie as they're having the tour of the house, and they go down into the cellar, and they're having it explained by the owner slash one of the guests that because he was the owner and a guest, right? I did get that right.
Yeah. Pritchard
Okay.
owns a place, and the Vincent Price was renting it from him for the night.
Yes, I knew Pritchard had spent a night in it before. I was just for some reason drawing a blank on that detail. Thank you, Mel. So he's kind of giving them a tour of the house and really, hyping up the haunted spots and that sort of thing. And they get to the cellar, and he discusses how one of the previous owners had loved to make his own wine and all that, and then describes how he had murdered his wife by dropping her in a vat of acid that was conveniently here as he raises the drawbridge like mechanism that keeps it covered. And it definitely made for an important plot point in the movie. Those of you who have seen it will know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, I'll echo what my co-hosts here have said, which is go watch this movie. What are you doing still listening? But the thought I couldn't get around was who keeps a giant vat of acid in their wine cellar? And I'm sorry, it was just one of those things that like I could not completely let go of. And I know it was important, but it was just like it's not important for the process of winemaking. It's a gigantic vat of acid that very specifically dissolves anything with hair and skin and leaves only the bones behind. I don't think that's a direct quote, but it's a very close approximation. And it was just I kept thinking about that because I knew it would come back around, and it definitely does in the very final act of the movie. But it's just one of those things that like I was like I just don't get it. But leaving that one bit of I don't know what you want to call it, disbelief aside, I enjoyed the movie. And like you said, Lisa, it's very tightly plotted. Has some good legitimate twists and turns that I think most people would not be expecting. You may, I mean, it's not like they're completely revelatory. So if you haven't seen it and you're about to go watch it, don't expect a first viewing of The Sixth Sense or something like that. But there are some surprises, I would say. But I mean, it is well done, and it's a really tight movie. I think it's only about an hour and 15 minutes too, so it's not burdened by too much development, too much sprawl. They kind of introduce the characters in a voiceover at the beginning, what you were describing, Lisa, where they're arriving in their funeral carriages. So pretty much just before the opening credits roll, you get an introduction to the characters, and then you're off to the races, and it just kind of keeps going from there. So I like it. It's a good movie.
Yeah, I had the same question about the acid too, Matt. So I'm glad I'm glad you brought it up because I had forgotten. Like I remembered the skeleton, but I had forgotten that she basically gets like pushed by the skeleton into the vat of acid.
And I did have also a follow-up kind of question on that as well, and we can maybe discuss this later or we can talk about it now. But the skeleton that Vincent Price was manipulating, was that a fake skeleton or was that the actual skeleton of the doctor that he threw in there after he got shot? Because I couldn't tell, and I really want it to be the guy's actual skeleton because I think that makes for a much more interesting story, makes him much creepier.
I mean, I always, and this is a good question because we need to talk about the ghosts in this film and the scares. under the impression that Vincent Price just had a fake skeleton and that was his plan. Like he knew what his wife was planning on doing because he knew the whole time she was plotting to kill him. And I think he just didn't let on maybe how much he knew of her plan. And that might answer the question about why there was a vat of acid in the basement. That maybe he put it there, like that was his plan all along, was to do
Pritchard
that.
says that's where one of the murders happened, was in the vat of acid. So, but I do agree with you.
Make it more problematic.
I do agree with you that the skeleton, in all likelihood, especially for a movie that came out in 1959, it probably was a fake skeleton that the character brought because he was aware of the plan all along, like you said. But part of me wants it to go for that really more horror twist of he actually did take the guy's skeleton and articulate it with wires and use that to kill his duplicitous wife, because that would be the ultimate revenge there.
Yeah, I don't think he has time to put all the wires through it and everything because she came down as soon as she heard the blank fire.
I know, but again, I'm trying to push this because I think that it would be better in this story. But no, there's probably 100 reasons why it really was just a fake skeleton that he had ready to go for this. But I can dream.
Yeah. Well, I am curious, now that you brought up the idea of the skeletons, I'm curious about the ghost, because that skeleton at the end was, I think, meant to be a little bit more ambiguous. I think that's why we're kind of having this conversation. And one of the other ghosts that we see is Annabelle, but this is when we think Annabelle is dead before we learn that she's still alive. So when she goes to Nora, when Nora is in her room, and that's when Nora like runs out screaming, waving the gun or whatever. Poor Nora. She was really put through it in this movie. But when she sees Annabelle's ghost, that we're, I guess, looking back on it, supposed to be like, oh, that was really just Annabelle pretending to be a ghost. I loved the detail because it was so effective. It was a really effective scene where her rope is moving almost like a snake around Nora's feet, and the way it's kind of like slithering. I don't know. I thought that was really good. So we know that is one of the fake ghosts. We're not sure about the skeleton. I mean, I guess it's technically not a ghost, but we're not sure if it's like it was a plotted skeleton or if it was, the man in the acid. But really the only ghost story we kind of get is we have the fact that it's a haunted house, and we're told that from the beginning. And then we have, Watson Pritchard, who's the owner of the house, who says, he's just insistent on the fact that it's haunted. And he says, in fact, he owns it, but he's only stayed there one night, and they pulled him out the next morning, like nearly dead. Like, it's a really effective story when he tells it. He knows that there are 7 ghosts because 7 people have been murdered here. And every time he thinks somebody has died in the house, he's like, yep, we got another ghost. I mean, he's very much the person who's the believer, playing to some of the other people's skeptics at different times. But then I was thinking, one of the other ghosts that I really love in this, because it's just, on one hand, it's creepy, but on the other hand, it fits this time period so well, and it fits a William Castle movie so well that I really loved it, was that old woman ghost that scares Nora when I guess she's in a closet by herself, and they're like knocking on the walls because they think they found like an oddity in the house. Was that put there? Like, was that rigged by Annabelle to start making Nora think she's being haunted? Or was that one of the real ghosts of the house? Like, are we supposed to believe that this house is really haunted?
Well, that particular woman was one of the caretakers. She is the blind wife of the caretaker. Because when the door opens and the caretakers are about to lock them in.
But doesn't she come back that second time? Because she's not moving like she's the caretaker.
No, she's floating around strangely, like she's on a skateboard. But that's before they see them, though. Like after they leave. But who knows? Maybe they're ghosts. But I thought that was kind of cool because it plays around with the idea of the supernatural explained, because Nora's already scared because the guy who's the caretaker tried to rescue her. Remember, he's like, come with us, don't stay or you'll get killed.
Right.
Which we don't know if he was told to do that to scare her or if he really is worried. Who knows? And then the woman caretaker, I understand that it doesn't make any sense that she's like skimming around.
She's
the way she is.
She's floating. Like she's not. But that's
so maybe they do disappear and lock the door early. So maybe they were already dead. I don't know. But I just assumed it was supernatural explained that Nora's afraid of ghosts, but those two are real, like she shouldn't be afraid.
Nora, if they had played it where like she had just spied her in the corner, like in the door frame or something, or in the window, and had like screamed, I would buy that. But the woman was floating. So I don't know, but I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe that was supposed to be, we were seeing it from Nora's point of view. So we were experiencing it as Nora experienced it, which means like, because she had been so hyped up to get into this haunted house, or this house that she was told was haunted, she was seeing things that weren't, that weren't actually there, or if they were there, she was seeing them in a distorted way. But like the woman, being on a skateboard, that's a perfect example, because I'm 99% sure that that's how they shot that, is they just put her on a skateboard and there was somebody with a rope pulling her across the room, and she had her hands out in that very menacing way and she wasn't moving. I don't buy that it was just the caretaker.
Well, maybe Annabelle and the psychiatrist got the caretakers, like paid them or something to be acting creepy, because the both of them scared Nora. So maybe it's all part of the plan.
I mean, I guess the disembodied head was planted there by Annabelle.
Yeah. And then her floating outside the window was them with the harness and everything, though I still don't understand how the rope moved by itself. But
and I don't understand how they got out of the house.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that, but you're right. I was wondering why there was no window in Nora's room, and so the rope could come right in through the bars. But yeah, how did he get out there? And how did she get out there so they could lower her and then pull her back up? That's a good question. Of course, I mean, if they created all this as one big like haunt box, maybe they have more control over it than we know.
Well, and I mean, they did, because if you think about the first things that happen is when Nora walks in, the door slams behind her, and then the chandelier falls. So yeah, I think you're right. I think they had just kind of rigged everything. I would not be surprised if they didn't pay off the caretaker's wife to do that.
And for the caretakers to leave too, because everybody knows at that point that Nora wants to leave. And so with the caretakers leaving like 10 minutes early, she can't get out. So yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, this movie is much more tightly plotted than I even saw, like watching it, because Nora's in the crosshairs from the very beginning. I mean, even the wife's feigned jealousy of Nora and telling her, just be alone, you'll get hurt, is just to make her more creeped out.
Yeah. There are some lines in this one too. Like I wrote down a few of them, but when Frederick is looking at his wife, who he thinks is dead, after she's been hung, and he says, so beautiful, so greedy, so cold. I thought that was a pretty good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That was a very good Vincent Price line and delivery there.
I don't want to take you in a direction you don't want to go, Lisa, but I just wanted to mention, where you're talking about Vincent Price's delivery, that the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the underlying or like barely controlled like violence in his performance. I also thought was really interesting too for a movie that people talk about like being directed by William Castle and having the gimmicky stuff and the haunted house stuff. I mean, when he pulls the guns out of the coffin, he shoots something in the room to show them how to use the gun, and he has the gun right next to his wife's face while he does it. When Pritchard is watching the dead body, he literally physically throws him out of the room, and you see Vincent Price, you see how tall he is and how big he is too, and he's like throws him out of the room literally. And that moment when he's trying to get Annabelle to show up to the party and she won't, and he grabs her hair and yanks her head back, he never really yells. He's always calm and quiet, but he does these things that show this like simmering violence right underneath the surface. Even when he's talking to her about drinking the champagne to make sure she didn't poison it, he's still talking like calmly, but you can tell there's all this like seething anger kind of underneath the surface. And I think you kind of see it with her a little bit, but Price is like, I mean, he's almost like this pacing tiger or something, but he always has this demeanor like he's not controlling this at all and has no bad feelings. I mean, even though everything he's doing to these people is dangerous.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And even though she's orchestrating all of this in those moments, especially like I'm thinking now of the scene where we first meet him, where it's the scene you were describing with the champagne, where he makes the comment that it might be poisoned. Although I think he really doesn't think it is. You can tell she plays it where you can tell she's scared of him. Even though she's plotting to murder him and take all his money. When he does that, when he has those moments of controlled violence, I think that is a good way of describing it, or like a calmness with that violence underneath, like you were describing, Mel. She plays it where almost there's this like confidence, this cool confidence on one layer, but you can see she's terrified of him. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic to play there, because like she makes a point of saying a couple of times in the film that she's his fourth wife? Yeah. Yeah, she says she's his fourth wife. The first one disappeared and the other two died. They were both in their 20s and they both had heart attacks. And obviously she doesn't buy it. She doesn't buy that that's what happened. So I don't know. I'm really curious about what was going on with their relationship too, because for her to have such, now that I'm looking at it, for her to have such cunning and to put all of this in place to manipulate Nora to murder her husband in a way that she does. I don't know, but then to be so afraid, it's just a very interesting dynamic. I think the two of them. I would enjoy learning more about what was happening, because they're both so cold at times, and they're both so intent on killing each other that it's kind of remarkable to watch.
Yeah, in some ways they're kind of a good match. But you're right, there is a fear in her, and I don't know, it could be just that she's afraid that he'll kill her first.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's funny the way they play it up, because they could have written this where she is, like a battered wife and she's at his mercy and she can't ask for a divorce or, whatever. You could play it up all these ways, but she isn't played like a victim. Like they are very well matched in that, and it's hard to tell where that fear is coming from, because is she truly afraid of him and like what he's capable of, or is she just thinking, I need to kill him before he like figures out what I'm doing and tries to kill me? It's really fascinating. And then I wonder too at the end with the with the skeleton, if she didn't fall prey to her own tricks too. You know, if it didn't start kind of weighing on her that perhaps they were in a haunted house, even though she had been the one orchestrating the haunts the whole time.
That's an interesting take. Yeah, because I mean, he acts like it's him, right? So yeah, I mean, he is pretending that he has become a ghost in the house because he was killed. And so yeah, maybe it is that she kind of falls. That's interesting. The person who's manipulating the haunted house to trick people ends up getting tricked. And I mean, to a certain extent, I you can read it as if the skeleton didn't even push her into the vat. It was her own, like, just fear that caused her to make this series of terrible decisions in the dark that caused her to fall into the vat. So yeah, the person who was trying to manipulate someone's hysteria and fear ends up getting manipulated in turn by hysteria and fear. It is a kind of interesting turn at the end there. And it also goes to the idea of how the supernatural in the movie is so subjective to perspective, too. Because even though a lot of things are explained, you know, Pritchard's still trying to figure out why his brother was killed. I think it was his brother. He had a family member that got killed and they never found the head, and the two people. And so we have him thinking that the place is haunted. That may just be him being haunted by his grief. And we hear, as the viewer, we hear the laughing and the screaming and whatnot. So does that mean there are ghosts? So even at the end, it's ambiguous as to whether, even though all the stuff we've seen was debunked, is the bloodstain that appears over Ruth Bridges all the time and drips on her. That seems like a lot for the psychiatrist and whatchamacallit to do, Annabelle. They're not after Ruth Bridges, so why does this blood follow her around and drip on her? Why do we hear these noises? You know, like, I feel like the movie is ambiguous and that the place could be haunted even though they're manipulating the supernatural to try to trick each other.
She's also remarkably calm about the blood dripping on her.
She is. She wipes it off really hard, but yeah, she just kind of stands there and it's like, oh, blood on my hand.
Twice. It happens twice, and she's remarkably calm about it.
What if she just dismiss it? I forget how they explain it away, but it was something where I was just like, woman, that's not what it is.
Oh, the first time at the very beginning, she says that it's like water dripping or something like that, and I was like, no, that's clearly blood. Water is not red. I'm sorry, lady. Yeah, I agree with you, Mel, that there is a little bit of ambiguity to it, and that's something that I did like. Like, yes, the main plot is focused around the machinations of people, specifically Vincent Price and his wife, but I do feel like there is enough ambiguity as to some of the things that were happening in that house that it could actually be legitimately haunted. Although Pritchard was kind of fun to, like, every time he would chime up with like, it's a ghost, you know, just kind of go, oh, okay. Because he was obviously drunk throughout the entire movie as well. So that was a nice way to establish the unreliability of his viewpoint. Sorry, could not think of words right then.
Yeah. It's I don't know. I kind of now want to give this another watch through, just trying to point out, because I was so focused on the supernatural happenings as they occurred around Nora that I wasn't really paying attention to the things that might have been happening to other people, or the things that we just might have seen or heard as viewers that might lean more into that ambiguous territory. I'm curious.
We still don't know what hit Lance on the head. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in, but that's another unexplained moment as well.
Yeah. Sometimes I forget Lance is a part of this movie.
Poor Lance. Yeah.
He's a little forgettable when he's not on screen.
And he disappears through the secret passageway for the whole climax of the movie.
He really does. Yeah, he really does. I'm curious, did y'all watch the black and white version, or did you see one of the colored versions?
I watched the black and white version.
I actually watched the colorized version because
Oh,
when I searched on Amazon Prime, that was the one that came up. We have a Fire Stick that connects to the TV, so I was able to search just directly through that, and that was the first one that came up. So I didn't realize that the black and white one was also available. If I had, I would have watched that one. So I watched
well,
it, but it would not have been my first choice in my
okay.
defense.
Well, I'm curious about it because I did the same thing, Matt, when I was searching to watch this movie. That was the one that came up. And then I thought, I wonder if I can find the black and white one. And I actually had to change devices where I wasn't on my Fire Stick anymore because my Fire Sticks are the same thing. And I found it searching on my iPad. And so I ended up watching the black and white version, but now I'm curious, what was the colorized version like? Because what was the acid? Was it green? Please tell me it was green.
Basically greenish. It really looked like you went to a swimming pool that was an indoor pool, basically. Like it was a greenish blue. And then yeah, really just kind of greenish blue.
Oh, I'm so fascinated by these kind of black and white movies when they'll do that and add color to them later. So yeah, I just wanted to get your impressions on that.
In all honesty, and I've seen colorized black and white movies before, of course, but it didn't really seem to add anything to it, to be honest. It did help with the stain and the dripping of the blood on her hand because you were able to very easily tell that it was red. But even in a black and white movie, water would be clear, whereas that would be a more opaque because it's blood or fake blood. So it didn't really. It didn't really help it, but it was all the rage at the time, so I can't fault them for doing it. But yeah, I would have done black and white if I realized it was also available for free. It was one of those, oh, it's free. I'll watch the free one rather than paying to rent something, even if it is a couple of bucks.
I completely understand. And the blood, just so we're clear, the blood in the black and white version still very clearly looked like blood. So I don't know what her problem was. Although looking at, because I was just wondering how, like, I'm looking at pictures right now from the colorized version. I was worried about how the skeleton scene would look when that climax where she's confronted by the skeleton and she's like in her nightgown. But looking at some of these pictures, it looks pretty good, honestly. So I might have to go watch that.
Yeah, I think it was no better or worse than a black and white version would have been. Like I said, I don't think it added anything, but I don't think it really detracted either. So I think it held up fine as a colorized version.
Yeah, I don't know. I will definitely have to watch this another time, even though I've seen it a million times before. So I don't know. I can't really get enough of Vincent Price movies, and this is a great one. I think Vincent Price and William Castle, when they team up, you can't go wrong. So yeah, I'm really glad we did this. This was a lot of fun. Well, I guess that's it for this episode. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon and get access to exclusive content. Or simply rate and review us, which is entirely free and helps other listeners find us. This episode was researched by Lisa, Matt, and Mel. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.